Of play is I'm going to say some shortish general comments about the project as a whole. Then it's Katie and Lara, and then we're going to talk about the architectural projects. And I think Ali is going to talk more about architectural practice and working with religious and interreligious buildings. So it's slightly longer, but there still should be plenty of time for a Q&A, as you suggest.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, David. You can
Anyway,
start.
yeah.
You.
So everybody can see, and the sound is okay. Yeah. So thank you, Christos, and thank you for introducing the research project. So it was a research project, as you said, that ran, broadly speaking, from about 2014 to 2019, supported by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. It was a joint project between my department, the Department of Geography at Royal Holloway, and the Department of Geography at University College London. I think the first and most important thing to say, really, before we start doing anything, is that the PI was Claire Dwyer. She was the driving force, the energy behind it, and in a way, I think one of the reasons, perhaps, that we haven't done as much since 2019 as we might have done collectively with the work that we did is because of Claire's death. And quite simply, we miss her all terribly. We're still the researchers on the project are still a sort of group of friends, and we stay in contact with each other. And I think about Claire an awful lot, and I think it reflects the project. I don't want to say it was the culmination of her work, but it brought together so many of the things that Claire did so well, which was an interest in different kinds of identities within Britain and an interest in religious faith. She brought to it her own religious beliefs without that being something that was overwhelming or doctrinaire within the project. It certainly would never have happened without her. She was constantly the driving force behind what we did. And just reviewing it over the last few days, actually, this is the third presentation I've made in the last year about this. So there clearly is interest and topicality and a desire to hear more about what we did and its relevance for now. It just feels that she was so not ahead of her time, but so on the money in terms of what this was. It came about through conversations. I mean, we were both friends, neighbours, and co-geographers. It came about through conversations. Firstly, my interest in suburbs, in what rather grandly might be called suburban theory. But there were arguments about how one of the features of the suburbs that developed in the 20th century and that have developed in different ways in other parts of the world later on in the late 20th and 21st centuries pointed towards secularization, talked about these as spaces where perhaps some of the traditional social geographies of religion had started to break down. Certainly our own part of London, that was a theme that contemporaries in the 20s and 30s, as semi-detached London was built, that people were saying that where are the churches, where are the faith communities? These are places that are places of materialism. And that just didn't seem to coincide with some of our own experiences of our own churches, and particularly that kind of sense that there was a hidden creativity to suburbia. So my own church, Claire's own church, were places where people were creating things, were beautifying the buildings that they inhabited or the buildings that they worshipped in, were making a distinctive contribution to the spaces that were around them. And before the grant, we published a paper that has been fairly influential about secularization and the changing geographies of religion in London's suburbs. And that really was the starting point for the project. The project itself had a couple of features. One was it was very much our locality, so our part of West London. One of the things that I think we recognised, I mean, it's a feature of much of London. It's perhaps been more discussed for inner London areas, but our part of the borough of Ealing was just saturated with worship spaces, of all of the major world faiths, a kind of smorgasbord of Christian denominations. I mean, one of my favourites is the St Mary's Cathedral of the Assyrian Church of the East, which is an old Baptist chapel that has rather grandly been styled as a cathedral, but has its own signpost from the main road in Hanwell in West Ealing. I think we were also aware of the way that suburbia was changing. These are spaces, Ealing sees the impact of the Elizabeth line. There are new kinds of developments and a new kind of rhetoric that this is a place without a spirit. This is a place without a soul. This is a place where other kinds of things are being marginalized in the new suburbia that's developing. And what we focused in on, and I think is relevant for the conference this week, is the ways in which religion was an active force for creativity. That what we wanted to do was to explore the hidden creativities of religious life. And that was about the importance, as we saw it, of religious life in the lives of many Londoners, perhaps not the majority of Londoners, but of many Londoners, the significance of religion in a changing British population and particularly a London population. But I think too about the ways in which what we were kind of thinking was the ways in which placemaking, the ways in which everyday organizations other than property companies, big developments, have the ability to shape spaces around them. And we were kind of arguing that the nature of the shorthand neoliberal city was squeezing that out. And it's interesting that the local state has less money, less ability to do things. We've seen a decline in secular civil society organizations, and just pointing to what religious organizations were doing with their buildings, with the material culture in those buildings, with the ways in which they perform and worship, was a significant element of creativity. And I guess there was a sideline that also said that a lot of arts and policies about creativity actually quite deliberately are secular, quite deliberately exclude what's going on. I've currently got another project running, which is about local theatre and religious theatre, or the performance of religion isn't really sort of considered in arts policy. The Arts Council wouldn't dream of giving a grant to a religious organisation because that's not how they see creativity. That's not how it's defined. Just briefly to introduce the project, it used a range of things. A lot of it was standard historical and social science methodology. So we did documentary, archive research. We were interviewing people from, we had a focus on 7 different faith communities, include Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, Reform Jewish, as well as different Christian denominations. We did ethnography, we did participant observation. But I think at the core of it was a commitment to creative methods. And the things that you're going to hear from Lara, from Katie, from Ali later on were absolutely central to what we were doing. That what we were doing was getting creative professionals to interact with faith communities. And very often those were cross-faith exercises. I think one of the things that we really did that was distinctive was that we had projects that might bring 10 or 15 or 20 people together over a longer period of time, perhaps over a period of months, to make something. I mean, in it's only three people, but the film that Laura showed last night is a really interesting example of that. I think it stimulated conversations and interactions that wouldn't have happened without the cooking and the filmmaking that were there. And we had a pretty big program of exhibitions and events that toured around that also brought those people from those faith groups into contact with a wider public, but also into contact with each other. So you're going to hear more about Katie, about the fabric of faith. We're going to hear more about Laura's wider spiritual flavors project. Ali and I are going to say something about the architecture project. Just very briefly, I just want to give due notice and credit to the other people that were central to the team. One was Nazneen Ahmed, who's in the middle of this picture of the team. Naz did a lot of the archival interview policy papers work. I wrote with Naz for journals about planning, but she also was a creative writer, and she's a published author. She writes young adult fiction. She's a lecturer in creative writing at Exeter University now. And her creative writing was part of the ways in which we worked. I think Katie may talk about this, that while that artwork and project was running, Naz was working with people. Naz was writing poetry. This one, Stitching in St. Thomas the Apostle Church Hall, which was the place where this project took place, we don't have time to read it here, but is utterly beautiful and very meaningful to me, because it was the piece that I read at Claire's funeral. So it has a real power. Natalie Hyacinth, who was a PhD student at Royal Holloway during the length of the project, doing work on music and faith in suburbia. That ranged from Christian hip hop in West London, full of the sort of interesting positioning and identity that comes with that. It's not cool to be a Christian rapper. It's not cool to come from outer West London, but the 29th chapter seemed to deal with that. Also working with Christian faith groups, with Hindu faith groups, talking to people about the ways in which music was central to their worship. What was interesting was mind-boggling was that Natalie really was a participant. She learned gospel singing, she learned to do traditional Anglican choral singing, and she also learnt the veena. So she learnt Indian instrument to get herself inside those particular practices. And we had a wonderful event at the Tate Modern where we brought different religious music makers together to teach people from other communities how to sing in their faith styles. So combine Hindu, raga, gospel music and some Anglican choral music. A remarkable event. And just finally, one of the themes that was there within the project was about performing faith in suburban spaces, was about the ways in which faith takes to the streets, if you like. So passion plays, walks of witness here. One of the things in our area of Ealing, which is extraordinary, is the Hindu procession, the chariot festival that takes place each August, which literally turns very mundane suburban streets into a kind of sacred space. Wonderful pictures here from Laura's work, but also Natalie was in one of the worship bands that were moving their way around the streets in 2017. This is a picture that I took, which is of the Walk of Witness on North Aller Fields, which some of you who drive down the A40 will know as the sort of four big mounds, the sort of strange things that some people seem to think are Neolithic burial sites, but are actually the remains of the rubble from the old Wembley Stadium. If you zoomed in on the picture, there are three crosses up there at the top. That is a regular thing at Easter. And that provided the inspiration for another one of our artistic collaborators, Liz Hingley, to do. And she produced a series of artworks that she called Desire Lines that were based on those shapes that were actually intended to be kites that were going to be flown above North Aller Fields. Unfortunately, it was one of the projects. I mean, it ended up in an exhibition, and the kites were exhibited. There was a plan to hold a sort of big participatory event that got delayed because of Claire's illness, and then got delayed and effectively abandoned because of COVID, and it just proved impossible to do. We did plan to do it in the spring of 2020. Quite a lot of things didn't happen in the spring of 2020. So anyway, that's a brief overview of the people, of the themes. When we come to question and answer, I can say some more things about what I think that has to say about our methodologies, about creativity, about interfaith relationships. But I don't want to take too much more time. So I'll pass back to Christos and to my lovely colleagues, Katie and Laura. Thank you.